You're watching news at Prime. Let's get into another important conversation now, and we continue our coverage on the impact of the United States funding cuts to South Africa. Zabalaza Pathways Institute Executive Director Mazibuko Jara believes this presents an opportunity for South Africa to break free from dependency. He joins me now for more on his opinion piece that was published in the Sunday Times today. Mr. Jara, good evening to you and thank you very much for your time. Can I ask with this opening question, what does this Trump moment represent for South Africa in your view?
Look, it will definitely impact on millions of lives of HIV-positive people, so I'm not undermining that. But at the same time, we should not forget that the PEPFAR funding comes with a gag rule. For example, the abstain, be faithful, and condomize message does not go well with PEPFAR because of their conservative approach when President Bush started the PEPFAR fund. So actually, this is an opportunity for civil society in South Africa to look internally, to look at domestic resources. Unlike a country like Zimbabwe or other poor countries, South Africa has significant internal resources, particularly in what I refer to as the public funding system, your National Skills Fund, your sector education and training authorities, that is the SETAs, the Jobs Fund, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, many provincial development funds, which can be harnessed to support constitutional democracy, human rights, and even the provision of HIV/AIDS programs. So actually, we do not need money from the USA for the purposes of funding the kind of things PEPFAR was funding.
Yeah.
But South African civil society has not done enough to harness those resources, to put pressure on the SETAs. Instead, we see the SETAs, the National Lotteries Commission, and others being mismanaged, being victims of corruption from those who run them, instead of those supporting our own goals. We've got the resources. So this Trump moment must force us to look at ourselves and mobilize action so that we put pressure on government to release those resources in ways that can support own efforts.
Those are very strong views indeed, because if you hold the view that South Africa does not need funding from the United States, if anything, it can actually do that itself, the question becomes, have we as a country quantified those existing public funding opportunities?
We've not done very well to quantify those. For now, we can rely on the annual reports of these institutions, the National Skills Fund and the others I was mentioning. Let's take one example. The National Skills Fund itself for the last financial year had a revenue of 5.6 billion. That 5.6 billion did not really go towards social justice, human rights, HIV/AIDS care, and so on. We can go further. We can look at the annual reports of the 21 SETAs and other annual reports just to get a sense. But what we've not done is to say, of those funds that they have, how much can go to social justice? I make an example in the article where I say, if we took 1% to 5% of all these public funds, we would more than surpass foreign donors that fund civil society currently. So that demonstrates already the kind of capacity we have as a country. And of course, once government is put under pressure, it does respond. For example, the Green Fund was established. The Solidarity Fund was established during COVID. There is now a gender-based violence fund, which also was a result of civil society pressure. So civil society can actually has results to demonstrate when it pressures government around funding for issues that are of the public interest and public good.
Yeah, you've already touched on this point. I'd like for you to expand on it. When you say in the article, foreign funding is never neutral, what does that mean? Spell it out for us.
We have seen in Uganda and elsewhere in East Africa how the Museveni government and other governments there have been conservative on lesbian and gay rights. That is not just because of their conservatism. That is because of a well-funded program by the right wing in the United States, which targeted those countries for a conservative agenda. So even organizations in South Africa are getting funding from these conservative organizations, which in a way that actually affects our discourse on rights. There's recent research released last year by the Institute for Journalism and Social Change, which shows how these Christian right-wing organizations from the US have increased their funding by more than 50% in 3 years to fund a conservative agenda. And of course, the other aspect is the economic policies the country adopts. You're not going to find many civil society organizations funded by US funders calling for progressive redistributive change on land reform, on economic policy, and other questions of economic justice, because those US-funded organizations basically promote a free market economy, which is against the interests of ordinary people in this country. So that's the kind of impact that you have with strings attached to foreign funding.
So to sum up our conversation, therefore, countries right now that are lamenting the loss of funding from the United States, what is the moral of your argument? Is it that we need to move the conversation to questions about self-reliance?
To a significant extent, yes, particularly for a country like South Africa, where we've got such resources. In the long term, even for poorer countries, it is in their own interest to increase their sovereignty, to increase their autonomy away from foreign funding. But at the same time, those countries must still push for a different agenda of foreign funding, where countries of the South are not controlled through funding. There was an interview on Al Jazeera not so long ago. In fact, last night, a former director of USAID admitted publicly that the agenda of USAID was not just to help the poor, but it was also to serve the strategic interests of the United States government. So there's a clear foreign policy agenda with the kind of funding that comes from the North.
So it's clear then that the kinds of attacks that South Africa currently faces, is that part of that agenda to try and influence policy making in countries such as South Africa?
Trump is working a big finger, making us forget that we've got our own resources, do as we please, or we cut the funding we give you. But then that makes our governments to tremble. It makes our civil society to be desperate and cry out, whereas actually we can look in a different direction of building our autonomy and sovereignty.
Mazibuko Jara, thank you very much for your time. Very interesting views indeed. He is an executive director at the Zabalaza Pathways Institute. Thanks indeed.